Welcome to The 5 Books, where each week we talk with a Jewish author about 5 books that are near and dear to them. My name is Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen, and today I'll be talking with Laurie Frankel about her new novel, Enormous Wings, about a woman in a retirement home who finds herself pregnant at the age of 77.
I like that there's this little kernel at the beginning of this book that feels difficult to believe, surrounded by realism. It struck me going in as a really great way to talk about issues of agency and issues of autonomy that are poignant and difficult when we're talking about people who are older.
Laurie Frankel is the New York Times bestselling, award-winning author of 6 novels. Her writing has also appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, Poets and Writers, Publishers Weekly, People Magazine, and more. She is the recipient of the Washington State Book Award and the Endeavor Award. A proponent of transgender rights, she wrote about her child's transition in an essay in the New York Times titled From He to She in First Grade. Her novel, This Is How It Always Is, also about a transgender child, was a Reese's Book Club pick and was listed as one of the best books of 2017 by People Magazine, Bustle, and more. A former college professor, Laurie now writes full-time in Seattle. In this episode, we'll talk with Laurie about the very Jewish capacity for holding space for many different ideas and views.
One of the things that Judaism does so well is hold opposing ideas in the mind and on the table at the same time. You know, I think that there's that saying, which I think is meant to be pejorative, that you have 2 Jews in a room and 3 opinions. And I think that that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing, because it means at least one of those Jews is able to hold opposing ideas and not say, like, we all believe this one thing and we never believe this one thing. I feel like what we want is nuance.
And we'll discuss what conversations are missing when we talk about bodily autonomy.
Sometimes the conversations we're having are really narrow. Like, we're talking about pregnant bodies. We're talking about abortion. You know, whatever else you want to say about the abortion debate, at least we're having it. At least it's something that people are talking about. When we start talking about aging, bodily autonomy, who's making decisions about bodies as they age and as they sicken and as they die? Well, we're not talking about that stuff at all for many reasons, one of which is certainly lack of viable options.
All that and more coming up next. Welcome to The 5 Books, Laurie. I'm such a fan of your work. I genuinely have been counting down since I finished This Is How It Always Is, and since then have been waiting for your next book. So one of the things that I admire most about your writing is the way you explore these enormous ethical and cultural questions through characters who are utterly specific and feel alive and so emotionally precise. And that's true in Enormous Wings. For those who haven't read the book yet, you can tell us a little bit more, but the premise is about a 77-year-old woman who unexpectedly becomes pregnant, and Pepper Mills feels entirely plausible from the first page. Her desires, her history, her stubbornness, her humor, all of it feels so deeply grounded in the logic of her life and her relationships. I'm so excited to talk to you today about these characters, about motherhood and aging and autonomy. So I guess if you could start with telling us a little snapshot of the book, and then what compelled you to tell this story.
Yes, for sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure, an absolute delight. Well, you did a really great job of pitching the book. The book is about a 77-year-old grandma who, in the opening pages, rear-ends a priest, and her children decide that she can't drive anymore and compel her to move into a retirement community against her will and better judgment, where, however, she's really thrilled to make very good friends and even fall in love. But then she falls ill. She goes to the doctor, and when she does, she finds out she's not actually sick, she's pregnant. And then it sort of imagines, like, okay, then what happens? What would happen? And it goes from there.
And how did you come up with the story? Where did you start?
I mean, yes, how did I come up with that plot, which is really fairly unhinged? Such a good question. And everyone has asked, because it's a little bit of a bananas premise, and it's a hard thing to trace back all the way to the beginning. One answer is that when my grandmother got sick 25 years ago with what turned out to be lung cancer, it presented in early days as kind of vague nausea, and she just felt really off, and she felt really dizzy and confused. And she and I were joking that maybe she was pregnant, which in her case would have been fantastic news because pregnancy is always better news than lung cancer. Though she was in her 80s and, she came by lung cancer honestly. She'd been smoking cigarettes since she was 13. But I wasn't a novelist at the time, and I wasn't thinking about writing that at the time. And 2.5 decades later, I think that seed finally took root. And the thing that appealed to me about it is that I like that there's this little kernel at the beginning of this book that feels difficult to believe, surrounded by realism, surrounded by taking that premise and playing it all the way out and thinking about what would happen and what does it mean. It struck me going in as a really great way to talk about issues of agency and issues of autonomy that are poignant and different and difficult when we're talking about people who are older than the way that we explore those questions otherwise. And that seemed to me to be a really interesting confluence and a really useful way to have a conversation about things that are otherwise very difficult to talk about, which I think what novels do. I think that's what novels suit up for.
And I'm excited to delve into all of those themes and issues with you. I heard you say that Pepper Mills was the most Jewish character that you've created yet. So, A, is that true? And B, why create this Jewish character for this story?
She is the most Jewish character I've written, even as she herself is. She's not especially religious. What she is a stranger in a strange land in a lot of ways. And, at a plot level, it's because she's just moved into this retirement community. She's given up her car and her home and everything that comes with that to go and live in this other place with these other people. And that strange overlap of, at once, she feels old. She has made this move because she's old, and yet she's brand new there. And she is doing all of these activities that one does when one is young, such as move to a new place and make new friends and meet new people and learn new customs. And this isn't the first time she's done that. So the other thing is that she is in Texas, and she has moved there from Brooklyn. So that was another time when she was very much this stranger in a strange land, and where her Judaism made her different than lots of the people around her, and meant that she grew up in a different way, in a different environment than lots of the people around her. This book is not about abortion, but it comes up. And I wanted to, the reasons why she is unable to get an abortion are very focused, and I didn't want to at all suggest that they were religious. But mostly I think it's that, and I think we'll probably talk about this as we talk about other books too, but I think that one of the things that Judaism does so well is hold opposing ideas in the mind and on the table at the same time. I think that there's that kind of saying, which I think is meant to be pejorative, that you have 2 Jews in a room and 3 opinions. And I think that that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing, because it means at least one of those Jews is able to hold opposing ideas at the same time and think about both of them and talk about both of them, and not say, like, we all believe this one thing and we never believe this one thing, which it seems to me is at the moment, I don't know, destroying the country. Like, I feel like what we want is nuance and the ability to say, well, I believe this part of this thing, but not this other part of this thing. And I acknowledge that it's complicated by these other aspects of this thing. That to me does feel not exclusively, but notably Jewish. And I think that that's a wonderful thing. And again, I think this is what novels do. Novels and Jews do really, really well.
People of the book for a reason.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Book 1, A Jewish Book from Childhood, The Shawl and Rosa by Cynthia Ozick.
We're Reformed Jews, and we certainly more culturally, I suppose, than religiously Jewish. We went to Shawl for high holidays. We did Passover always. But that was the extent of it. Well, and I went to Hebrew school through high school, actually. In fact, the deal was that I would do Hebrew school through the bat mitzvah, but then it kept being interesting. In fact, I think it got more interesting after that. I think the high school curriculum was more like debate.
It's such an unusual thing to be compelled to stay in Hebrew school longer because it's so fascinating.
Yes, right. It changed. And in fact, I fought Hebrew school for a long time because it wasn't interesting. And in fact, in my early years, it was sometimes offensive to my young person feminist sensibilities. My sensibilities as a 10-year-old female human in the world were offended sometimes. So someone somewhere strategically realized that the curriculum had to change if we were to stay engaged, and that engaged was the most important thing.
And tell me when you read The Shawl.
Also in high school. Yeah. I was in fact trying to remember exactly how and where I came upon it the first time, and I couldn't. It speaks to my reading privilege, I guess. Part of my high school curriculum, we were very much encouraged to read. I remember in my junior year, we had to read 300 pages a week that were outside of whatever we were reading for class, and we were journaling about that. There were so many skills there, and certainly there's reading and there's writing, but there's also putting your hands on stuff that you are interested to read, which is itself a really good skill and one that isn't talked about or taught very often.
So first of all, for listeners who aren't familiar with the story, can you tell us a little bit about it? And then why did you choose it when I asked you as a book that helped shape your Jewish identity that you read in childhood?
It is a very short story. It ran in the New Yorker in 1980. I mean, I think it's under 2,000 words. It's a very, very tight story. And Cynthia Ozick is very good at doing a lot with a little bit. And it is a story about a woman who is first on a march to the concentration camp, and then in the concentration camp, she has an infant with her who, of course, she can't feed and can't really take care of, but who she has wrapped in this shawl, and she's with her niece also. And the baby survives for longer than you or she thinks she will, but then she learns to walk, and she realizes that this child is not going to survive having any kind of ability to be apart from her mother, that the only way that she's been able to protect her so far is by keeping her silent and with her. And that as soon as this child starts to toddle, all will be lost. And indeed, the child is murdered by the Nazis. End of story. Except not really the end of story, because Cynthia Ozick also wrote a novella called Rosa, which picks up with the mother and the niece 40-ish years later in Florida. And they're usually published together now in a single short volume. And when I was a kid, what struck me was the short story, because it is violent and visceral and terrible and unforgettable, really. But when I went back to it, I mean, in part actually to write this book, because, well, some of it is I thought, oh, this is a good story about an old woman in a retirement community. I will read the story about an old Jewish woman and I will learn some things. And the first thing that I realized is she's not actually old. She's in her 60s. And the reason why she seems old, it's because she has lived through this extraordinary trauma and grapples with these terrible memories, and now has to go forth and live in Florida and be in the world. And that tension and that struggle and that impossibility is what struck me this time around when I went back and revisited that story.
I guess what strikes me is that it's almost unbearable in its rendering of powerlessness. And the voice is so urgent that a Nazi officer throws the baby onto an electric fence, and the mother Rosa uses the shawl to stifle her scream. That lack of autonomy, the voicelessness, I was thinking about those echoes in other parts of your work.
Yes, right, exactly. And I think Cynthia Ozick echoes it herself, because there are, of course, many, many, many ways in which 60-year-old Rosa in Florida has all sorts of choices and autonomy that 20-year-old Rosa does not have in a concentration camp, but it's not as many as you'd think. And some of that is surely because she is older, but it is also because once this thing has happened to her and her family and her child, she can't move on from that. There is no moving on from that. I think as a reader, you read that second story, that novella, and I mean, first of all, it's not long, but it's much longer than the 2,000 words of the short story. And so you get to know her and you want her to be happy. I mean, you want there to be some redemption. You want her to, to have sorrowed but moved on. And that is an unreasonable thing for the reader to ask of this woman. And Ozick makes you sit with that. Sorry, you can't have moving on. Moving on is not a thing you can have. You want her to try harder, and you think you would be so happy if you could just, make some friends. And that indeed is what her niece wants her to do. And that is unreasonable of all of us to ask of her, which is an astonishing lesson. And I guess not just a lesson because you kind of know that, but a demonstration of it. That she makes you sit through all of these pages where you're like, maybe it'll be better. Maybe she'll get better. Maybe she'll have a friend. Maybe she'll eat something nice for dinner even and have a little bit of joy. Nope. No joy.
Book 2, a Jewish book from adulthood, Angels in America, a play by Tony Kushner.
So Angels in America is actually 2 plays. It's a 2-part play, each of which is 3 hours long. So big, large in scope, and extraordinary. It is about the gay community during the AIDS crisis. Though it's about a lot of other things. And one of the things it's about is Judaism. And it's about America. I mean, it is definitely a kind of State of the Union sort of a play. And it's about angels. And that notion of what does magic look like when it comes? And what does heaven look like when it comes? And how does that overlap? How does that interact with what's going on in this country when what's going on in this country is terrible, as it often is?
So what made you pick this play to talk about today?
I mean, one of the answers is because I love it. I love talking about it. I mean, one of the answers is because I like plays. I am always reading a novel. I'm almost always writing a novel. I'm always thinking about novels. I lead with novels. But also, then there's plays. So, and I think that brings in a different audience and a different way of talking about things. And when you ask open-ended questions, I think, ooh, hooray, we can talk about Angels in America. Angels in America, I don't think is a play that anyone would say, this is a play about Judaism per se, but it secretly, sneakily is, and that I think is very interesting. I mean, it opens with a rabbi, and it has lots of Jewish characters, and they're Jewish in a variety of ways, and a variety of, levels, I guess, and it's a conflicted, or maybe just, complicated Judaism, which is something also that I think we see less often than we might on the page and certainly on the stage.
Tell me more about that complicated Judaism, or what makes it feel Jewish.
We have these Jewish characters, and their Judaism is part of their identity and part of the way they navigate the world, but it's not necessarily their primary identity. And one of the things that we find, I think, in no uncertain terms over the course of this play is how much Judaism encompasses other aspects of people's identities, how much better of a job, how much more thoroughly Judaism shares than other cultures and certainly religions. In this case, it's Mormonism. In Angels in America, it's held up against Mormonism, and the Mormon characters find that they can't be Mormon and whatever that and is. And the simple version of that is and gay, whereas Jewish and gay, that's fine all the day long. But also it's that Mormonism doesn't go well with being sick. Mormonism doesn't go well with being confused. Mormonism doesn't go well with suffering or doubt or, losing one's way, in contrast with Judaism, which is offered to us in concert with all of those things. But simply to say, it's quite complicated. It is not a play of like good guys and bad guys, or good religions and bad religions, or the Bible says this thing, the rules say this thing, the scripture says this thing, and you will follow it. And if you don't follow it, then you're a sinner. It's infinity more complicated than all of that, which is, to my mind, what makes it a staggering work of culture and art.
Yeah. And the role that religion plays is both sustaining and constraining. To me, it's also a lot about how quickly institutions evolve for the humans that are living them. And that's something I know you've given a lot of thought to and plays a big role in your work. And so how do you think about that question of whether institutions can evolve quickly enough for human reality?
Yes. I mean, it's a super question. And I guess it depends on what kind of institutions we're talking about. And some of them do a very terrible job. And some of them set out to do a terrible job. And particularly religion. Sometimes religion wants to say the stability comes from not evolving. That's the strength, is from not evolving. That doesn't work for me. I do not subscribe to that point of view. And nor does, as I say, does this play. And that's surely a personal thing. There are lots of people who really are served by the message that lots of things change. This does not. Not for your parents or their parents or their parents or their parents. Not for all of time. This is the thing that stays the same. And for my guiding institutions, I want, well, things have changed. So we have to change too. And let's see how we can hold on to what was useful before and make it apply to the needs of now. That's a very different approach to religion.
That feels like a very strong through line in all of your work of not fitting into a box and defining things for oneself and making one's own inroads and life choices.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's true. This is what I am also always on about, is wider ranges of normal. Wider ranges of normal make the world better for everyone.
Book 3, A Book That Changed Your Worldview, The Power by Naomi Alderman.
The Power imagines that every female human on Earth develops the ability to shoot electricity out of her fingers, and then says, great, what happens next? It is one of those examples of things that I really like on the page, which is like it takes this one kernel of unbelievability and then surrounds it with realism, and it just plays the idea all the way out. Like, what would happen if all women and girls developed the ability to shoot electricity out of their fingers? Let's find out. And then she does that for 300 pages. It is, I mean, breathtaking, genius, brilliant. I mean, that book definitely changed my world.
Well, tell us how it changed your world.
I mean, that is a book that I remember exactly. I don't remember how I came upon it, but I was reading it during book tour on an airplane and just tears streaming down my face. And the woman next to me on the plane was like, what are you reading? And I told her and said, like, you have to read this book, The Power, Naomi Alderman. And she said, oh, I don't read sad books. And I said, oh, no, the book is not sad at all. I am just crying because it's so good. I can't believe how good it is. It is a really just super fascinating take on all sorts of things. I mean, as a female human myself, I found it very empowering. Both the idea of how would women respond to power, physical power, differently than men have, and also how would they respond the same? Super interesting, both of those questions. But also I found it really life-changing in that I write novels. And so when I read them, I look at how they're put together. How did she do this? And she just did a really great job. It tells a really great story that you cannot stop reading. Like, you can't stop turning the pages. But she does it in such a way that she has balanced these 4 threads and these 4 different characters and stories, and she figures out how to weave them all together. And it is a remarkable act of writing and creation, I thought.
It seems like you're drawn to these stories where there's one change in the body that destabilizes an entire social order. What interests you about that pressure point?
I don't know. And I'm not even sure that that's how I would characterize it, although I'm willing to. I think it's an interesting way of looking at it. I'm trying to decide if I think that it's true. I
could totally reject the premise.
I don't know. I really like the premise. I mean, this is what I mean. It's super interesting. I don't know if I 100% agree, but I some agree, and I love that. That's exactly what I want it to be. One of the things that I come back to a lot is that there is all of this gray space between physical body and what we might call emotional or behavioral or social aspects of one's person. And I think that is complicating and therefore interesting. It is, as an example, why I didn't want to write about a 40-year-old pregnant person or even a 47-year-old or 57 or even 67-year-old pregnant person. I want to write a 77-year-old pregnant person so that we can talk about the body, but not just the body, and the changes that are wrought upon the body, but not just that. And it is certainly something that I wrote about in This Is How It Always Is, which is about this trans child. And that, too, is about the body. And there is certainly a physical, corporeal aspect of that, but it's not just that. And I am very worried, I guess, when we decide anything is all one or all the other. We say, oh, this is just physical, or we say this is just social. This is just socially constructed. I get worried about both of those things. I am interested in the overlap. I'm always, always interested in the overlap.
I think the other thing that struck me was in the power, the women go to the convent, and this is where they kind of discover and launch their new power. And I was thinking about this Vista View retirement community in enormous wings, which becomes, it's not just women. There are obviously men there too, but there are all these women and they gather there outside of, maybe traditional structures, and they have these new identities that emerge. Does that comparison make any sense to you?
Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. And a retirement community is super interesting to write about because it's in some ways it's like a desert island story. You put all of these people in, you lock the door. It's this cloistered, closed community. They can't leave very much because for the most part, they can't drive and they can't walk very far. This is, of course, not true for all people who are living in retirement communities. It's true of this particular retirement community and these particular characters. And so they're this very, cloistered, closed off community, and they have to live together and eat together and socialize together, and they're living their whole lives in this building, and that is super interesting to me, always super interesting to me. And indeed, it is a heavily female population. There are men, but they're also outnumbered. What Pepper observes when she's moving in is that this is likely the last move that she'll make, that one makes however many moves in one's life, and this is probably it for her. And at the same time, she feels like she's going back to college. It's like a dorm in that, when you live in a house, you live in your house, but then you go out of the house to do all sorts of things. And in this case, the whole idea is that all of your needs are met in this community, in this one place. And so everybody is thrust into this basically social experiment. And then the other thing that she observes is that the age range is wider than any other people that you live with your whole life, because, now we have these 55 and up communities, and that up is until 105. So that's a 50-year age range, which is, of course, not true in your college dorm, nor in, your elementary school, nor when you're, raising children and you're mostly hanging out with other people who are raising children who are more or less kind of the same age. That at the end here, to come into this community that is so diverse and so wide is super interesting.
Book 4, the book you're reading now, The Beheading Game by Rebecca Lehman.
Right now I'm reading a book called The Beheading Game, Rebecca Lehman. It imagines that Anne Boleyn, after her head was chopped off, wakes up in her She's buried in an arrow box, like a box for arrows, instead of a coffin. Historically, I don't know why. But she wakes up and reattaches her head to her body and goes forth to seek revenge. It's super interesting. I'm not finished yet, but I'm most of the way through, and it is fascinating. Rebecca Lehman is a poet, and so it reads very, very beautifully, but is itself super fascinating. And that's another one of those things where that juxtaposition of this like gorgeous prose and beautifully observed details with this historical figure who wakes up without her head and sews it back on because, of course, she has the skill, because one did at the time, and goes forth into the world to see what she can do about it, is great. It's a really, really cool book.
Book 5, the author's latest book, Enormous Wings by Laurie Frankel. For me, there was this echo of the biblical Sarah, the late-in-life pregnancy. Famously, Sarah is 90 years old. She's been unable to conceive. God tells her that she's about to have a baby, and she laughs. And she names her son Isaac. Yitzchak in Hebrew means, and she laughed. I wonder if you had that story in mind at all.
Yeah, I mean, I did, and Pepper references it. I mean, I think that the other biblical parallel, which Pepper also comes to, is New Testament one, the virgin birth, like these miraculous pregnancies, where the answer is God or angels or magic. What I think is interesting is that we think, oh, well, that was long ago and far away. And either you take the Bible as a story, a parable, a metaphor to begin with. She wasn't literally 90, that kind of thing. Or maybe you do take it literally, but you think, that was a long time ago. Things were different then, in any number of ways. So maybe that one too. Certainly all sorts of miraculous things happen in the Bible. It is not a text of realism. So that, to me, that is interesting. That's always interesting, is that tension for what are you willing to suspend your disbelief, is maybe a good way of putting it, when you are reading, and when are you not. And I ended up doing a good bit of research and explaining all of the ways in which one might actually be able to become pregnant at 77 and giving a scientific grounding for that. I came to that fairly late in the drafting process because I really went into it saying, I don't know why, it's a miracle. And that's what the Bible gets away with that I cannot, basically, is this like couching of like, we don't know. It was God. Don't ask why. Don't ask how. That's not the question. The question is what happens next. And that's what I wanted to do too. I didn't want to tell you why or how. I wanted to think about what happens next. But then I realized eventually that, well, I realized two things. One, I realized is that I'm not writing the Bible and it was going to piss people off. They wanted an explanation. But also, once I started looking into it, the science was really, really interesting. And it was quite a bit more possible, than it had seemed to me. And so then I wanted to talk about that too.
I thought the science was super interesting. You tie it to the impact of an experimental breast cancer treatment that Pepper had had decades earlier. And so I wondered what you were trying to say about medicine and science.
Yeah. I mean, so in that case in particular, I did a lot of research into people even older than 77 who have successfully carried pregnancies to term. And those were not naturally occurring, whereas Pepper's is. Pepper has sex and becomes pregnant, whereas people who are older than 77 who have carried pregnancies to term, first of all, there are not many, but there are not none. And those people have used someone else's eggs and a great deal of science to cause that to occur. So that's different. But it's not that much different. And then indeed, I started looking into a combination of gene therapies and hormone therapies, both of which are used all the time. So the science there was fascinating. As to what I am trying to say, my concern is with other aspects, I guess, of medicine. The pharmaceutical companies and the way their research is funded versus the way that they make profit on drugs is something that causes me grave concern and rage. And to the medical system in general is something that Pepper struggles with as a patient. And that is something that I think, too, is true, not universally, but certainly in this country, that you need not be 77 to be frustrated with your medical care, that pretty much everyone I know is frustrated with their medical care and their ability to access it equitably.
The book made me feel rage at many different points.
Yeah.
The obvious theme is about autonomy and who gets to make decisions about a body, a pregnant body, an aging body, a dying body. There were so many layers. What do you think is missing from our cultural conversation around autonomy?
Everything. I think everything. And some of it is that sometimes the conversations we're having are really narrow. Like, we're talking about pregnant bodies. We're talking about abortion. And we think like, oh, that's what we mean when we say bodily autonomy. And it's certainly one of the things that we mean when we say bodily autonomy, but it isn't anything like all of them. When we start talking about aging, bodily autonomy and autonomy in general for people who are aging, that's a conversation that I think we are, I mean, you know, whatever else you want to say about the abortion debate, at least we're having it. At least it's something that people are talking about. And, you know, as opposed to, oh, okay, great. What are our options as we get older? Or who's making decisions about bodies as they age and as they sicken and as they die? Well, we're not talking about that stuff at all for many reasons, one of which is certainly lack of viable options, which is another one of these examples of the systems that exist are not serving the world that they're set up for, the people that they're set up to serve and to help. And that lots of people with very good intentions and the best interests of say, aging parents at heart are, however, making decisions that contradict their positions as to bodily autonomy in all sorts of other parts of their own lives and worldviews, which is also interesting.
I mean, the plot is set in motion when Pepper's children take away her license, effectively, and then she loses her ability to live on her own and forces her to move into the retirement community. So there's so many layers there. Was this alive in your personal life that made you think about aging in this way?
It is. I mean, so my folks are, both of them, still living in the house that I grew up in with its many, many stairs, 3,000 miles away from where I live. And that is sustainable today, but none of us know how much longer that's on the table. I wrote this book for the first time in 2017, but I picked it back up in 2023 when I turned 50. And so that kind of age, I mean, obviously that is not 77. That's, you know, I'm the age of Pepper's children rather than Pepper herself. But I was thinking about aging and thinking about getting older. And therefore, everyone I know is having this conversation with their parents at the moment. And my parents' friends are all having this conversation with each other. And it's this like, I've seen a wealth of a wide variety of things that people have tried, and they're all terrible. All of the options that seem to be on the table are problematic in one way or another way or another way or another way. And they all have to be negotiated, and everyone wants the well-being and self-actualization of all of the people involved. And gosh, that's hard. It's just a really, really, really hard needle to thread.
I think it brings to light both the conversations that adult children and aging parents should be having, could be having. There's a friendship. Pepper becomes close friends with a woman named Dot who is dying, and over the course of the book, her mortality becomes more pressing, and there are conversations that she wants to have both with her peers. Her clarity about her own mortality, I think, brings up another dimension of autonomy. So if you could talk more about the conversations specifically that you hope people are having, or what you wanted to say about that.
Yeah, I want to have conversations. I don't even want to dictate those conversations. I don't want to say you have to look at this and you have to be thinking about this and you have to be talking about this in this way. I want to acknowledge that the conversations are really, really hard and we must have them anyway. And that there are no perfect answers. This is often true, probably, but I think that, and I say this as someone with decision-making problems, But I think that often the answer is like, well, sure, there are negatives to anything you go with, but any of these choices would be good ones. And in this particular conversation, these end of life things, I often think, well, there are no good answers. These aren't minor complaints. These aren't small negatives in largely pretty good situations. These are really, really terrible hurdles in lots of cases. And of course, we're talking about life and death. So it's very sad and very scary. And these are very, very difficult conversations to have. In some ways, I think it is good that we are having them. Those of us who are having these conversations with people who are older, when we ourselves are older, are very lucky because we've worked up to these conversations. We've lived a long time. We are better equipped to have difficult conversations at the end of life. Always, however, accepting the fact that some people are no longer able to use their brains in the same way as once they were. And that, of course, makes those conversations less like conversations. So being able to talk about these things is itself, I think, an extraordinary privilege.
I think the book is such a corrective to how we think about older women, and older women seem to be having a moment. I don't know if you saw, Roger Rosenblatt wrote this beautiful piece in the Times. It was called "My Wife is 85. She Takes My Breath Away." It's like an ode to old ladies.
Oh, wonderful.
So
I didn't read that. I'll go look it up, though.
Yes. I guess I just, what draws you to old ladies?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was very close with both of my grandmothers is probably the easiest answer to that question. And I think that old ladies are really, really interesting people who are not given enough credit for being interesting people. One of the things that Pepper observes over the course of this thing is she generates this media storm. She becomes the center of attention, and her friends in this community are grateful to her for this miracle that she has caused to occur. And she says, I didn't cause this miracle to occur. I don't know why I got pregnant. And they're not talking about her pregnancy. To them, the thing that's miraculous is that people are paying attention to them again all of a sudden, that they're really, really quite used to being invisible and moving about the world invisibly. And there are many ways, of course, in which that is really, really difficult. But there are also ways in which it's kind of wonderful, particularly after a lifetime of the kind of attention that women often receive. And so she appreciates both of these things. She is frustrated by being ignored, especially by, as an example, her own children, but also she appreciates and comes to appreciate more her ability to move through the world undetected and to do whatever the hell she wants finally. That there are so many fewer pressures on her because she is not taking care of aging parents, and she's retired, so she's not trying to have her career and all of the negotiating that goes along with that. She's managing her children, who she has been managing for the last 50 years. So she's well practiced at that. And now she gets to do this other thing. So in many ways, it is this new start, and what a wonderful time to be able to do it. Another thing that I think novels do really well is give voice to people whose voices we're not otherwise listening to. And old women are definitely one of those groups.
It's such a joyful perspective. I interviewed Judith Fjorst for the podcast, and she's written a book for every decade of her life where she talks about those decades. And I think she said her 90s were her favorite decade until her husband passed away. And then she went back to feeling like her 50s were her favorite decade.
Wow.
So I think you also bring that to the retirement community, which we touched on briefly, but it becomes a place where Pepper makes these close friendships. She falls in love. The community rallies around her, and Moth, who's her boyfriend, for lack of a better word. Is that aspirational? Do you just want to depict like the best that these communities have to offer?
Yes, absolutely. It is aspirational. I mean, she's annoyed by many aspects of Vista View. There's a lot of rules, and the food is really terrible, institutional, and she's surrounded by old people for the first time in her life. She's got her complaints, but there are many ways in which it's a wonderful community. She makes very, very good friends, and she falls in love for the first time in a really, really long time. Her ex-husband also lives there, which is another one of her complaints. And they certainly have a relationship that is at times trying and mostly funny. Like her ex-husband, he's a funny guy. But for me, yes, for sure, it's super inspirational and aspirational, both of those things, because she does settle in and make these friends and have these people who understand both where she is and where she's come from. So that's part of it. Well, and she's having sex, which a lot of people have felt really grossed out by, for lack of a better word. Like, they're put off by and she herself observes, like, I know that what she says is, I know no one wants to hear about this part, but I don't know why. And to me, I think we should all be so lucky to be sexually active at 77. Like, what a wonderful thing. So yeah, in every way, I find this to be something to be aiming for, possibly with slightly better food.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on Moth and just the questions around abortion. Pepper is constrained in having an abortion, both because she lives in Texas, and then there are some medical concerns. And then you give us Moth, who his wife has died of breast cancer many decades before. They were unable to become parents. And he just has this sense of wonder and a sense of miracle that's incredibly moving for him to be contemplating parenthood for the first time.
Moth is great. His observation, his point is, well, he's got a number of them. One is certainly that, like, yes, we would not have chosen to have a baby at this juncture. Becoming a parent he's 79 is not a thing that he would have set out to do. And the difference between making the best of situations which you find yourself in versus situations which you would seek out, and the ways in which those things can be brought closer together, which I think is just pretty good life advice in general. His other observation is that there are ways in which it is easier to become a parent when you are young, but there are also ways in which it is easier to become a parent when you are older. We like to think that pregnancy is a miracle, and we like to think that it is a wonderful and blessed thing, but really it's pretty narrow. We don't like when people get pregnant too young, and we also don't like it when people get pregnant too old, and that too old is, I mean, we start talking about pregnancies being geriatric in one's late 30s. So it's just a really, really narrow window there during which we celebrate and we feel socially great about reproduction, which is itself enormously problematic. His point is, like, great, if you're 22, you can get on the floor and roll around with a kid and pick them up and haul them all over the place, and you've got lots of energy for the fact that they're only sleeping 2 hours at a time and whatever. But that what older parents have is stability and wisdom, and that is also really, really valuable. And to suggest that it isn't just because you can't roll around on the floor is ridiculous. And, you know, his particular observation is like, look, I don't have aging parents. I don't have a job I have to go to. I don't have a house that I'm trying to keep intact and gutters that need cleaning out all the time. I have lots of time to hang out with a baby. And in fact, I have lots of downtime and lots of inclination to nap and to have little snacks. And, like, these are things that babies are great at. And that in some ways the marriage between babies and elderly people is really quite wonderful, even if we don't usually think about them being primary parents themselves. Although I will also add that, again, though Pepper and Moth are outliers and this has happened to them naturally, lots and lots of elders are parenting their, as grandchildren, for instance, are taking on primary caregiving duties for babies and young children in their lives. That's happening all over the world all the time.
I think what I so loved and appreciated about this book was, well, first of all, it's so funny and it's just so joyful. The characters are felt entirely alive. I just wanted to hang out with them longer. And it also, as I said, it gives you just such a different perspective that I found really inspiring. I just love your writing. So thank you so much for being here today and for giving us so much to think about around these questions of autonomy and family and aging and what it means to live in a body. that the world
Thank
is
you.
constantly trying to talk about. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be having this conversation. I love to talk about things that we can think about afterwards. So I am very grateful.
Thank you so much for joining us today for the 5 Books. Our guest today was Laurie Frankel, talking about her novel, Enormous Wings. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love to hear about it. Drop us a comment on our Instagram @5bookspod or to our email, team@5bookspod.org. You can also sign up for our newsletter. Emailed straight to your inbox, we keep you up to date with new episodes, plus links to all the books we discussed and even more book recommendations. You can sign up in our show notes or on our website, 5bookspod.org. I'm Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen. Our producer is Odelia Rubin. Editorial and website support from Amelia Merrill. Music by Dove Rosenblatt and Blue Dot Sessions. Art by Elad Lifshitz of the Dove Abramson Studio. Thanks especially to the Jewish Book Council, and thank you to Felicia Herman and David Benor.